Thanks, Nathaniel, for the introduction. So I'm very happy to share some insights with you on how BPM can help, beyond its typical realms and going more into IT and enterprise architecture type topics as well. Before I do that, maybe a quick introduction about Signavio for those of you who haven't met us yet. So we're a company founded 5 years ago, around 50 employees based out of California, Berlin, and Singapore. And Signavio, in essence, is a business process modeling platform that allows business users in IT to collaborate and design business processes. Signavio is already used quite a bit out there, so more than 500 medium-sized and large organizations have already chosen Signavio from various industry verticals, various use cases, so some for pure business process improvement initiatives, others for mergers, acquisitions, or other restructuring initiatives, or for quality management and risk management. So it's a wide variety of use cases that we see for the platform. Coming to the to what Signavio actually does as a tool is, well, of course, modeling. So you can map out business processes, discuss them, collaborate on them, improve them, and then, of course, also disseminate the knowledge throughout the organization or implement it in IT systems. So, talking about the key strength also of Signavio, or what makes us different in this business process management space, is that Signavio builds a nice bridge between generating maximum traction for the process initiative, which is important to gather as much knowledge and ideas as possible, and also generate acceptance for the whole initiative very early on. So this on the one hand, but also on the other hand of being able to consolidate and govern even complex process architecture. So beyond looking at individual processes, the overall process architecture can also be managed. So this is basically our core business or core focus, and what we've done in the past years, and what we've been very successful with. There is a nice observation actually, or an interesting observation that whereas previously our main target group of Signavio was the line of business manager or process owner, or the business process center of excellence, were the main focus group or the main user group of Signavio. Whereas recently it has really expanded towards also application owners, so who are responsible for individual applications, and also to up to the CIO or enterprise architects within the IT organization. And the perspectives or the questions they have are actually quite different. So when coming back to the classical, let's say, BPM use cases, the line of business manager wants to, simply wants to make his customers happy, generate more revenue, or increase margin, and, uses process improvement techniques as a tool for that. Or on the other hand, the business process centers of excellence, who have the task to develop the BPM capability and, provide process governance and support the lines of businesses. So really the business perspective on things. If we now compare it to the application owners and CIOs and enterprise architects, they have a slightly different focus. So the application owner is interested in delivering the right application. He might have, he might be responsible, for example, for Salesforce as an application, and now his task is, to provide it in a way that it really supports business and does what it should. Also, in terms of cost and time to deployment or time to go live, the idea is to leverage as much as possible the standard functionality provided by this application, or leverage also new functionality that comes with upgrades, avoid customization or custom coding as much as possible. So this is, and of course, ensure the system performance so that everybody can work smoothly. That's his main concern. Going to enterprise architects and CIOs, they have even a slightly different angle once again. They have to manage not only one application, but rather see the interconnections of a complex application portfolio, define priorities, understand the implications the different applications have on one another. With the main goal, of course, to increase the agility of the organization overall. So make it flexible, enable change, so that business innovation goes alongside with the changes in the IT as well. But on the other hand, again, like the application owner, cost pressure, pressure to rationalize is always a big thing in IT organizations. So everybody expects the most agile and the most up-to-date IT portfolio, but nobody wants to pay for it. So this is kind of the setting that for us as a vendor was quite interesting to see and quite challenging to bridge the gap actually between the business view and the IT views. But it turned out that actually if you follow the BPM path, many of the questions that arise with those new target groups are actually addressed already by the BPM initiatives typically. So for example, if you want to manage a complex application portfolio, you need to have deep understanding of what these processes, these applications are actually used for. That's the main purpose of being. If you want to understand, for example, interfaces between applications, every interface is motivated by a process. So if you want to understand how two systems or two applications should talk to another, well, you just have to look into the process. Typically, the information is already there, and the understanding is already there to be able to do that and manage that. Also, increase the agility of the organization. Well, of course, not everything that IT provides needs to have the same degree of agility, right? So there are areas that will simply not change so fast, especially those areas where, from a process-oriented view, a good enough process is, well, as the name indicates, good enough. Whereas there are other areas of differentiation where the pace of change is a lot higher, or where the need to innovate is a lot bigger. So the process-oriented view typically delivers those answers. And also then, to derive priorities on the IT side, well, can typically be derived from priorities of processes, right? So that rationalization, which means, consolidating systems or shutting off systems, you can typically get the information that goes into the prioritization, typically from the knowledge that is already produced in the BPM side of things. When talking about the application owner, the process-oriented view also proved to be very, very very valuable. So, for example, delivering the right application, fulfilling the major requirements, having a process understanding helps a lot. And it even enables things like end-to-end testing. So rather than just doing testing within an application, for example, you can really take the processes as a test framework to look if really the end-to-end process works with the applications as they have been engineered or customized. Also, standard functionality and application upgrades. The big question is always, what impact does it have on my processes? Is it only a change in a form, or is it even not visible at all to the user, or does it require completely new structures, completely new ways of working from a process perspective? And also system performance. In order to prioritize that, again, I need to understand what are the critical areas, and those critical areas I can typically identify already from a key performance indicator view on processes. So once again, the process-oriented view is very, very helpful, very, very valuable to these questions the application owner has. So what does it mean from a tool perspective, or to put it the other way around, what can we as Signavio do to help this? So we've seen that the process-oriented perspective is already a big help, but we need to go one step further, right? So just offering a BPM tool to these audiences is already a good thing, but there's a couple more things that need to be done, especially with enterprise architects and CIOs. Processes for them is just one perspective out of many. So they are interested in the process architecture, of course, but they're also interested in the information architecture. They're interested in the application architecture with the technical interfaces between them, and they're interested in the IT infrastructure. So what are the servers or even hardware behind the applications? So this is one thing that needs to be provided to this target group here. And there's basically two ways of delivering that. So one way of doing it is to deliver a unified tooling so that the enterprise architects and the business process people basically work on the same tool, where they have one object repository that is shared and basically a complete meta model that covers all of the perspectives, which has the nice side effect that you have basically a unified model lifecycle and governance over everything that happens in here. So you can clearly assign responsibilities, and one thing integrates nicely with everything else in the repository. The other approach that we see quite often out there is that a BPM tool is used for the BPM side of the initiatives, and there might be a different tool, an EA tool already in place that covers, for example, the information architecture perspective or the IT infrastructure, for example. So here the approach is to have different repositories, different tools. The business process people work in one tool, the enterprise architects in the other tool, and then there's a certain overlap in the information that is captured, and through synchronization mechanisms, this information can then be shared. And then you typically have, in terms of governance, a master-slave relationship, so that IT objects, for example, can only be edited and described in the EA tool, and the business processes are edited and described in the BPM tool. In order to illustrate this, at least I'm going to show this part, so where Signavio offers some of the functionality that is expected in the A discipline. This is what I'm going to show you right now. After that, I'm going to come back to the slides and also talk about how to make application owners happy, especially in an SAP context, so with SAP portfolios. Okay, good. So let me change now to my Signavio tool. So some of you have probably already seen it. It comes either as a cloud service or as an on-premise installation. In both cases, you access it through your web browser, and then you can start capturing the knowledge in there. So as I said, the typical things that are captured in Signavio is the whole process notion. So from process maps or value stream overviews down to the very detailed process levels. This is what you typically find as information inside of Signavio. Recently, we've added new capabilities that go beyond process, as I mentioned, towards the EA direction. And there's one notation or one diagram type that stands out in this context, which is Archimate, which is basically which is the standard notation for enterprise architecture models. Just like BPMN is for process modeling, Archimate is basically the equivalent for EA modeling. What you can do, just to show you a couple of examples, so you can come up with diagrams that either describe application portfolios. So, for example, simply lists or groups of IT systems that you have in place and that are used in in processes, for example. Of course, you can also drill down then into the technical perspective. Let me show you one example. So for example, here we have a drill down into the technical infrastructure behind, for example, the Signavio SaaS system, where you can then, go down the technical stack of describing what are the components behind it. Like in this example, Apache and Tomcat web application servers and a database running on a ESX virtualization layer, and then going all the way down to the physical level. On the other hand, you can also describe things like information architectures, but also let me show you one example of data, so data-centric representation. So for example, here the question is, there's lead data or leads as a data object. And now the question is, who's accessing it, what processes are using that information object, and what are the applications that this information object runs through. So for example, here leads, as you would expect, of course, can be found in the CRM system, but also produced by other systems or processed in yet other systems. So this gives you let's say a small hint into what Archimate can do. So everything that is yellow is the so-called business layer. So business relevant artifacts. Then this bluish layer is the application layer, and then the green is the infrastructure level. Just to show you how it feels like when coming up with these models. So you have a graphical editor, of course, where you can then connect these objects. So for example, once again, we have the Salesforce system, which is used by certain people, or which is used by certain processes. Where here, once again, of course, you can you relate it with all the processes from your repository, of course, right? Okay. Just to show you that how these objects or the information interrelates. So when creating IT applications, for example, as part of these Archimate diagrams, you can go ahead and then, for example, very quickly model a BPMN process that uses it. So let's say it's order cash example. So from order received to cash collected or goods sent, let's put it that way. Well, that's cash collected. So where you can then go ahead and, for example, say check order is the first step. Who does it? The sales rep. And now the interesting question, what IT system am I using? And then again, I can access basically the object repository and reuse those things that I've inserted there, right? So here I would have the Salesforce system, so that there's the direct connection in my process as well, right? So then send goods is done in the warehouse. So this is how this quick model functionality works, where you can very quickly, in a spreadsheet-based way, map out processes very efficiently. By the way, there's also an native iPad app for exactly this view. So if you're in a process discovery workshop, it's very, very efficient, very quick to map out the first versions of a process. Okay, so let's leave it there to show you how you can also model enterprise architecture artifacts or models inside of Signavio. Of course, all the functionality that you're already used to on the process modeling side. So, for example, the discussion modes where you can invite people to comment, publishing functionality where you can, publish it to everybody as part of a process portal, all that is, of course, also available to everything that you produce through Archimate. Okay, so coming back to my slides. So what I've shown was how Signavio as a standalone tool basically covers both process models and process information, but also covers additional dimensions like the which applications I have, how they interface, or what the technical background is, and so on and so on. As I said earlier, many customers choose best-of-breed approaches, meaning they use multiple tools that are interconnected. And there we provide a couple of out-of-the-box integrations with EA tools. So here's just one example, also a SaaS-based, quite lightweight enterprise architecture management tool called LeanIX, which focuses on the typical questions, which is a typical EA tool. And there the synchronization works as follows, that you have basically synchronized repositories where there's certain information that is replicated towards the EA tool, and there's other information governed in the EA tool, like applications and information objects, for example, where a fraction of the information is also replicated to Signavio and then offered in a read-only mode, so that you can basically you can reuse those objects as part of your models. You can't modify them in this case. And so you have also navigatability between the different views. What the nice thing about having a full-fledged EA tool is that it gives you all those nice reports that the CIOs love. Here are just some examples. So, for example, your project roadmaps on the IT side want to be managed, diving into the cost perspective, or having all kinds of metrics or heat maps is also often of interest on the enterprise architecture side. The good thing is with integrations like this, you can go ahead, use BPM Archimate as basically a graphical front end to visualize things, and then use those EA tools to leverage all the sophisticated reporting functionality that is typically there. Okay, so this just as a very quick introduction of how process modeling and enterprise architecture can go hand in hand. Coming back to this picture of BPM as an accelerator. So now we've dived into this part, so making the enterprise architect and the CIO happy, basically. Now let's go one level further and look at individual applications. So you typically then have the application owners. You often have large implementation projects on the application level, and a lot of cost and time spent on this level, basically. So here, in the remaining part of the presentation, I'm going to focus on the case of SAP. It has a large install base. Some things are quite similar with other providers, but I'm going to focus on SAP in today's presentation. And what I'm going to focus on, or one of the central components that play a central role here, is the so-called SAP Solution Manager. So everybody of you who has done or who uses SAP will most likely also know Solution Manager. This is basically the central lifecycle management tool for SAP portfolios that give you something which is called a blueprint. So a description of the SAP systems you're actually using, where you're using standard functionality, and where you've done customizations. So this is like the documentation part, but it also offers you possibilities to manage your test cases, for example, when doing system upgrades or implementations. It gives you a big variety of monitoring tools, system performance, but even up to the process level, that you're able to monitor how well your SAP systems are actually running. or what are the parts that are used, or where are the areas where you have to improve things. Also, the area of upgrade management. So you have impact analysis. What does it mean that I upgrade from version 2.6 to 7.4? What are the things that will change? How much of my custom code will still be compatible with the new version? All these things are handled in upgrade management. And also it offers things like change and incident management. So it's most often used as a central support management tool in SAP installations. And then SAP Solution Manager, again, connects to the different applications. In most cases, SAP applications, but also third-party applications, where it retrieves, for example, all the information that is required for monitoring, or also it goes into both directions. Okay, so the typical questions for those people who do SAP implementation projects the typical questions are some of those. So we often get asked the question, how can the business users be involved very early in the application lifecycle when doing an SAP implementation? Assessments like, is the current amount of customization really necessary, or can I switch off stuff? How can we build the process repository and Solution Manager most efficiently and not manually? How can we optimize test case management, increase test case coverage or decrease test cases, make test cases meaningful for the business use cases? And also things like, how can we offer trainings to end users most effectively? And the interesting thing is that all of these questions, again, boil down to business processes. So all the things that we do in BPM initiatives help solve these questions. And what I'm going to show you now in my second demo is how you can connect your SAP environment with Signavio. It's actually the first time that I'm showing it, so it's quite a premiere. So I hope it doesn't break down. So bear with me. So for those of you who've seen Solution Manager already, this is not so new, but for those of you who haven't seen it, just a very quick intro to some of the features. So one very nice thing about it is that it comes with a lot of reference content about all the SAP products that are out there on the market. So for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to dive into SAP ERP, which typically covers areas like analytics, processes, financials, human capital management, procurement, logistics, and product development, manufacturing, for example. But also in this repository, you would find, all the other stuff here, like warehouse management. You find, the supply chain solution or the industry specific solution that SAP offers. So there's a lot of reference content in here, and basically the reference content is already in a certain process-oriented way. So let me show you. I already downloaded some of the reference content into my Solution Manager. So, for example, here in financials, as part of the SAP of ERP, this is some of the processes that are typically covered by the SAP ERP solution. So from accounts payable over cash management all the way to maintaining accounts, treasury management, and so on and so on. Or, for example, here on the human capital side of things, for example, here we see managing recruiting. So when hiring people, this is the typical functionality or the typical functions or process steps, basically, supported by the ERP system. Okay. Now let me show you, just a word before I show Signavio once again. So this is all you get in Solution Manager. So the process description doesn't get any more sophisticated than this. So processes are basically lists of steps and of course with certain technical information attached to it. So for example, you can see what in SAP speak is called transactions. This is basically the functions of the system that are used to perform the steps. So in this, and they all have this abbreviation. Here it's called CAT2. And in your SAP system, you can then jump to CAT2, which will then give you the the functionality to record working time. Okay. Now let me show you how you can turn this into a let's say meaningful representation for business users. Because here we have a focus on steps in a granularity seen by the SAP system. You won't see any steps in here that are, for example, happening outside of the SAP systems. And also you won't find any process logic inside of Solution Manager. So it's just a collection of steps. So in order to get this business view for it, you can go to your Signavio, and let me go here. And there's a connector to SAP Solution Manager, which helps you synchronize between the two tools. Let me show you how it works. So here, I selected import, so I do an initial import from Solution Manager. Here I have a list of all the projects inside of the system. And then I have the equivalent of what I've just shown inside of Solution Manager. For example, here for financial processes, I then have the list. Let me, just in the sake of time, focus on two examples. So let me show you two processes here from the human capital management area, which is managing recruiting and recording time and labor data. So two processes we've seen earlier. Now I can import the project. Now fingers crossed that everything works. And what it will give me on the Signavio side is process maps for the, let's say, aggregated levels, and then all the way to BPMN diagrams for the detailed information. So now it, so I was only focusing on the human capital management, and I imported exactly those two, managing recruiting and recording time and labor data. And what it now gives me is, let's say, a BPMN representation, at least of the information that is in Solution Manager. In this case, we have, let me show it in the editing view. In this case, we only have a collection of steps, plus the information what system is used, plus there's more technical information to it. We see it here on the SAP Solution Manager. In this case, we have those transactions. And the nice thing is, you see it here, these transactions, depending on the system, have a URL, so that you can, well, it's not configured in this case, obviously, but once it's configured, you can directly jump to the form or to the function inside of the system directly from your process model. Okay, so this is what you get. Sometimes this is not the case with the reference information of SAP, but when you go into projects, then end user roles or organizational structures become important. On the SAP side, it's important because that is the basis for example, configuring access rights to your applications. In BPMN, we know that is represented through pools and lanes. So let me open the second example, managing recruiting. This has a little bit larger set of steps. So let me erase a couple of them. So let's many in here. I'll just delete them. And then you can go ahead and start applying the other BPMN logic to it. So you can say I want to have for example, pools and lanes. So it's my company, and this lane is maybe manager of the business department, manager in business department. And I got HR recruiting process. And I can go ahead and say, well, this one I don't have in my process. Interview candidate is actually, done by HR. What does this process, lead registration, I don't need that either. My process should start with, let's say, requisition. There's a starting point the manager does. So I'll put a start event here in front of it. I see already that what system is used here. So I have this SAP e-recruiting. I got the NetWeaver portal server. So for example, for approving the request, that might be a second thing, which is done by HR. This gives me then the the logic of the process. So you can imagine how you can show on a business level, concurrency and, what are the alternatives in my process and so on and so on. And you already have the information related to your SAP systems in here, so that the business model, you can always synchronize it back, of course. So when synchronizing it back, that you have a direct correspondence between the technical documentation or the technical blueprint on the solution manager side and the business-facing BPMN representation that is meaningful for those people knowing the process and thinking about how to implement it or how to improve it. Okay, so let's say, for example, this approval step could end in approved, yes, no, right? So if it's approved, then go to interview. If not, I don't know, something else happens. All right, so this is how you can build a meaningful business process model. Okay, good. So this should be it already for the presentation of how you can very tightly connect SAP lifecycle management with Signavio. So to getting very close collaboration also between the SAP teams and the business process teams. And just to give you a little bit more information about that, there is also a white paper that we wrote. So it's just, just fresh off the press. So as part of the follow-up of the webinar, we'll also give you information on how to access it, or even include it in the mailing directly either way. This gives you, more use cases. So what are the typical questions SAP teams have during an implementation project, and how Solution Manager can be used on the one hand to help, but also Signavio in a combination with that, so that you get maximum speed and the best possible implementation of ERP or other SAP products. Okay, good. So this is already it from my side. So I hope I gave you a good introduction into how BPM can help also the CIO and enterprise architects when managing overall IT portfolios or managing overall IT strategy, but also going towards specific applications, how in the case of SAP in this presentation, Signavio can be of great help to bring business and IT together, and not let the two things diverge, but rather have a joint team working on how to implement the best possible process, both from an organizational and from an IT perspective. Okay, so that's it from my side. So I hand over to Nathaniel, and I'm happy to receive your questions.